ひどいやつだと思うか？
あ？
危険で辛い仕事は全てお前任せ。そんな俺をひどいやつだと思うか？
これがお前の夢につながる道なんだろう。そう信じてるんだろう。何言ってやがる今さら。
そうだな。
It is extraordinarily difficult to write a compelling character. Perhaps the most difficult part of writing a compelling story. You have to make sure that your audience understands the goals and motivations of your character while still allowing that person room to be a human. Take a character like Onodera, for example. We know that she wants to be with Raku, but what else is there to her? What are her likes and dislikes? What makes her happy? What makes her angry? Since those aspects of her character are never really explored, if we take away her desire to fuck a high schooler, Onodera ceases to exist as a character because every action she takes is tied to that base goal. Contrast that with a character like Luffy, who, as we all know, wants to be the Pirate King. That goal does define his journey. It explains where he goes and why, but it does not define him as a character. Luffy is instead defined by his desire for freedom, his fear of loneliness, and ultimately, the impact that he has on other characters. Spend enough time with Luffy, and you begin to understand the things that make him upset, as well as the things that he finds admirable. And ultimately, you come to find that that goal is associated with who he is as a person, that desire for freedom. Therefore, if you take away that goal, there's still a lot of Luffy left. Because even though that dream does define his journey, it is his character that defines his actions. And that brings us to Berserk. When I decided to read Berserk, I was expecting another shonen action anime, you know, protagonist versus antagonist. Protagonist inevitably overcomes, and the story happens in between antagonists, but I could not have been more wrong to expect that. Berserk is not the story of good versus evil. Berserk isn't the story of a character pursuing some grand dream. Berserk is the story of a man. An incredibly tragic man living in a world that keeps putting roadblocks in his way. A man who fights against the flow of the world while everybody else succumbs to it. And ultimately, a man who fights himself more than he fights his enemies. And that man is Guts. One of the most compelling characters I have ever had the distinct pleasure of reading. How do you write a character like Guts so strongly that he can practically, single-handedly, carry the entirety of one of the world's most popular manga? Well, if the length of this video should tell you anything, it's that that is not an easy question to answer. Guts' story begins here. Alright, actually, before we get into Guts' story, I'd like to talk about his character design because there's a lot we can learn about Guts before ever reading Berserk. First of all, Guts is built like a house, and he carries a giant sword. So he's a gym rat. I am getting tired of all these tiny little anime boys who are secretly super strong. As a little skeleton twink boy, I think I speak for the rest of the skeleton twink men out there when I say we have had plenty of representation throughout manga and anime history. Let's get some love for our big titty boys. Second, Guts has a prosthetic arm, he's missing an eye, and he is covered in lots of little scars. So, he's a cat person. I love how subtle all of this is. I mean, maybe the arm is a bit on the nose, but he doesn't wear some ostentatious eye patch. And all of his scars are very light, skin-deep little numbers. It effectively conveys that Guts has been through some shit without looking like this. What is this? This looks fucking terrible. I'm not praising this specifically because it's subtle. I'll praise the subtlety of Berserk in one breath and then praise the over-the-top design of something else in the next. The reality is that both types of design have their own time and place dependent on things like art style, plot, overall tone of the story. I just think this subtlety works very well in Berserk's favor. Lastly, Guts carries more than just the big sword. He has some knives across his chest, a little dagger on his belt, little pouches on his sides, so you can assume from looking at him that he uses more than just his big sword, and the great thing is, you would be right in making that assumption. I don't like seeing character designs where characters just have random accessories or equipment that don't serve an actual purpose. Even if there's some Dark Souls item description that explains how they actually do use it, if they aren't practically using it within the pages of the story, it's just wasted space. The great thing about Guts is that there is no wasted space. If there's something that can be assumed by looking at his character, you are probably right in making that assumption. The knives across his chest, those are throwing knives, and he chucks those suckers everywhere. That dagger on his belt, just the thing for taking children hostage. The pouches on his side, that's real estate. Guts is a landlord. That giant sword of his isn't magically magnetized to his back, it has a sheath. Even if it's ultimately probably pretty impractical, I appreciate that it exists. Even his prosthetic is more than just a practical replacement for something that was lost, ultimately amounting to being no different from an actual arm. He can attach a crossbow to it. He can block attacks with it or stop his own sword from coming back into himself. It has a cannon. Okay, Guts has the coolest prosthetic ever made. Not only is it cool as hell in design, it's got a fucking cannon inside of it. Do I have any need in my normal life for a cannon attached to my arm? No, probably not. But if you told me I could have one, fucking amputate this shit. I no longer require its services. Everything on Guts serves a purpose and function. Even the fact that he wears all black armor and carries that massive sword have explanations that we'll get into later. Guts' character design tells a story of who Guts is, and that is what every character design should strive to do. So now diving into Guts' story proper. Well, if that's what Guts is into, who am I to judge it? What? Oh my god. The motherfucker double penetrated her. Now, what do these first 3 pages tell us about Guts? Well, first of all, Guts is extraordinarily capable. You can tell that he knew exactly what this woman was going into this situation and had a plan to deal with it, showing that he's used to this kind of thing and more than capable of dealing with it. Number 2, Guts is willing to do just about anything to win. I mean, think about this situation. Guts had to either be seduced by or seduce this woman, knowing full well what she was, then strip off all of his armor and weapons, putting himself in an extraordinarily vulnerable position, just so he could blast a hole in her proper. Not to mention sticking it inside of a demon woman. I mean, say what you will about the guy, but he puts in the work. Berserk is split up into arcs. The first one being called the Black Swordsman Arc, and we're going to learn a lot about Guts throughout it. Mostly that Guts kind of fucking sucks. He's a piece of shit. Guts will get an entire town attacked and burned, all for the sake of drawing out a single demon. See this guy? His name is Puck. He's an elf. He's also just about Guts' only friend. He breaks him out of jail. He warns him of incoming attacks. He heals his wounds with his elf powers without ever asking anything in return. And despite all of this, Guts constantly shoos him away and refuses to even call him by his name, choosing instead to just call him Bug. Guts will accept a ride from an old man and his daughter, knowing full well that the dead are drawn to attack him. Then, when the dead inevitably attack and kill both of them, he will blame their deaths on themselves for being weak. What a piece of shit. I found it very difficult to read Berserk at this point in the story. Partly because Berserk deals with some very heavy themes and dark moments that the author depicts in graphic detail. Believe it or not, I'm going to be giving you the censored version of this story throughout this video. But also because I could not understand Guts as a character. Number 1, he sucks, and number 2, I don't really understand his goals and motivations. I mean, I recognize that he wants to kill all of demonkind, but I don't really understand why. I don't understand the motivation behind that desire. However, as we all know, not liking something is not a reason for me to stop reading it. So I pressed on. In the last leg of the Black Swordsman arc, Guts faces off against a demon called the Count. The Count rules over a pretty sizable chunk of land and is just a complete dick to all of its inhabitants. He executes them, he tortures them, he eats them, but there is one person for whom his cruelty does not reach, and that is his daughter, Teresia, who he cares quite a bit for. So, of course, Guts will take her hostage and use her to create an opportunity to cut the Count's head off. Guts, you're hard to love, but you are really easy to hate. Demons don't die so easily though, and Guts gets to work torturing the Count and seeming to have a grand old time with it. However, in doing so, Guts splashes the Count's blood all over that thing, that Behelit, which Guts described earlier as a key to another world. And sure enough, as the Count is pleading for mercy, they appear. The God Hand. Up to this point, we've seen Guts have an unbridled hatred towards all of demonkind, but here in this instance, when faced with the 5 most powerful demons, his ire is directed at only one of them. The God Hand they call Femto, whom Guts refers to as Griffith. Griffith, however, is less interested in Guts, referring to him as beneath notice, and Guts does not take that well. He attacks Griffith and fails spectacularly to do anything. The God Hand redirect their attention towards the Count, and they explain that he was brought to them by his over-attachment to life. So, if he wants to stay alive, he has to offer them a sacrifice, like the one he made when he first gained his demon powers, at which time he sacrificed his own wife. The Count tries to sacrifice Guts, but he can't for a couple of reasons. The first being that Guts is already marked as a sacrifice. Guts has a brand on the back of his neck, which marks him as a sacrifice, as well as drawing demons and undead to attack him. It also inflicts pain upon him when those things are near. The more powerful the demon, the greater the amount of pain. And Griffith was the one that put that brand on him. The second reason the Count cannot sacrifice Guts is because the Count has no attachment to Guts. The sacrifice has to be someone close to you. Someone so important to you that losing them is like losing a part of your soul. As a result of these conditions, Teresia is the only viable option. A price that is too high for the Count to pay. So he gets dragged down into hell and the rest of them get returned to the normal world. Now Guts just exposed the Count as a demon and then killed him in front of his own daughter. Teresia is understandably upset. So Guts takes her to Denny's and they sit down for a nice breakfast so they can talk about everything that they've just been through. No, obviously he tells her to kill herself. God, Guts! Why? He expresses that if it's too hard for her to deal with, then it would be easier for her to just give up, to put an end to her worries, to stop with the struggle. Teresia refuses, vowing revenge against him instead, a challenge which he accepts, and we are treated to this face. I want you to keep this face in mind, because it's going to be important much later. The Black Swordsman arc spans the first 3 volumes of Berserk, and at the end of it, we're left with a lot of questions. Why does Guts seem to be the only person who realizes demons exist? What happened between Guts and Griffith? Why is Guts the way that he is? Well, hold on to those questions for now because we're going to spend the next 11 volumes going through Guts' entire life history up to this point. Holy shit. I thought One Piece had long backstories. God damn. Guts has led a pretty shit life, to be honest with you. His mother was dead upon his birth. His adoptive mother died when he was 3 to the plague, a death for which his adoptive father would blame him for the rest of his life, on the baseless notion that Guts' very existence is a bad omen. A grudge that would eventually lead to Guts having to kill his own father in self-defense. He was 11 years old. 11, killed his own dad. You know how Guts carries that gigantic sword? Well, Guts grew up in a mercenary group where the only way to earn your keep is to fight. Guts has been learning the sword since he was 6 years old. And at that age, a regular sized sword was as tall as himself. It's just what he's used to. Following the fight with his father, Guts would travel from battlefield to battlefield for the next few years, surviving the only way that he knows how. And ultimately, this path of bloodshed would eventually lead him to a certain battlefield where he would catch the attention of a certain mercenary group leader, a man named Griffith. Now, this video is about Guts, but to discuss Guts without discussing Griffith would be to look at only half of the picture, for two reasons. The first being the profound impact that Griffith will have not only on Guts' life, but also on his character. And the second reason being, sometimes the easiest way to understand who somebody is to understand who they are not. And that is Griffith. Griffith is a foil for Guts. They are opposites in nearly every regard. Where Guts is very brutish and rough, Griffith is very noble and elegant. Where Guts is chased away and hated by everybody he comes in contact with, Griffith is adored and sought after by his followers. Their basic designs are at opposing odds too. Guts has short black hair where Griffith has long silver hair. Guts wears cobbled together armor and equipment where Griffith has a matching suit of elegant armor. Their fighting styles are at odds as well. Guts relies on the size of his weapon and the strength of his swing to overcome his enemies, smashing through their armor and destroying their weapons. Griffith, on the other hand, uses his enemy's strength against them, deflecting their attacks with the curvature of his sword, then making direct, accurate strikes at vital areas to take them out in one blow. They're both strong. That's something that they have in common. It's just a different kind of strength. I would describe it as an immovable object faced with an unstoppable force. The last and perhaps greatest way that they differ is in the very reason that they swing those swords. Guts fights to survive. It's the only way that he knows how. He doesn't question why he fights, he just fights so that he can make it to the next day to fight some more. Griffith, on the other hand, carries a grand dream. He wants to have his own kingdom. An absurd goal to say the least, but it directs every action that he takes. And it's because of this grand dream that Griffith decides he needs an excellent soldier like Guts on his side. So he invites Guts to join his mercenary group, the Band of the Hawk. An offer which Guts initially refuses, but then accepts on the condition that Griffith defeats him in combat, which he very narrowly manages to do. Now, everything about Guts' past up to this point explains who he is in the Black Swordsman arc. His distrust of others, his willingness to do whatever it takes to win, even the fact that he looks down on the weak. Guts has spent his entire life on battlefields. Strength is the only way that he knows how to survive. You'd look down on the weak too if you were in his shoes. And so it's even more fascinating to watch him become a more compassionate person during his time with the Band of the Hawk. Guts has been around a lot of mercenaries up to this point, but the Band of the Hawk are different. Mercenaries are inherently selfish people. They fight to earn money so that they can exact their own goals. They might fight together for a similar cause, but that doesn't mean they're fighting for the same reason. They're ultimately fighting for their own ends, and it's every man for himself. This is where the Band of the Hawk differs. The Hawks are dreamers. They all have goals and ambitions that they're trying to exact. Some as grand as becoming a knight, or joining nobility. Others as humble as being Griffith's right-hand man, or as small as opening a clothing shop. But all of those dreams are encompassed within Griffith's grandiose dream. The Hawks fight for Griffith's dream, under the hope that by following him, their own dreams can come true. After all, it would be pretty easy to open a clothing shop if you knew the king. So even though they all have their own goals that they're working towards, they all fight for the same cause, Griffith's cause. and this instills in them a heightened sense of camaraderie. They didn't join just any mercenary group, they joined the Band of the Hawk for Griffith specifically. They're there to fight together. So they protect each other, they care about each other, they become friends. This is something that Guts has never experienced before. For the first time in his life, Guts finds people who want him there. People who trust in him, who believe in him, who rely on him. And this begins to change Guts. Guts knows two things. Guts knows he's the strongest, and Guts knows he has nothing to lose. Everybody else has a reason to fight, a reason to swing their sword. Guts, on the other hand, does not. Guts learns the names of the people who fight for him, and ultimately learns their ambitions. And he begins to realize that for each one of them that is lost, that is some grand future that is now dead. So Guts puts himself in danger first, because he knows that if he can't overcome, nobody else can. And if he dies, not a lot is lost. It's a pretty stark contrast to the guy who wouldn't even remember the name of the one person who would help him out. And yet it's the same collection of dreams that makes Guts begin to question his own existence. Surrounded by all of this ambition, Guts begins to question why he swings his sword. For what reason does he continue to each next day? For what purpose does he continue to survive? And in the midst of this confusion, Guts would overhear the following from Griffith. One who dreams of world domination. One who devotes his whole life to the thorough tempering of one sword. If there is a dream which takes his whole life to find, there are also dreams which, like storms, devour tens of thousands of other dreams. With no relation to social status, class, background, whether it suits them or not, people yearn for a dream. Sustained by a dream, hurt by a dream, revived by a dream, killed by a dream. And even after being abandoned by a dream, it continues to smolder from the bottom of one's heart, probably until the verge of death. A man should envision such a lifetime once, a life spent as a martyr to the God-named dream. Ultimately, to be born and then to simply live for no better reason. I can't abide such a lifestyle. To me, a friend is something else. Someone who would never depend upon another's dream. Someone who wouldn't be compelled by anyone, but would determine and pursue his own reason to live. And should anyone trample that dream, he would oppose him, body and soul, even if that threat were me, myself. What I think a friend is one who is my equal. And there you have it. Griffith, the first person to ever want Guts, does not consider him a friend. The person who gave him all of this and instilled this question of purpose into him does not consider him to be an equal. Shortly after this revelation, Guts realizes he can no longer continue to live the way he has been up till now. He can't continue to survive simply to survive. He can't stand the idea of being looked down upon by that person who gave him everything. He has to discover his own reason for existing, and realizes that his 3-year tenure with the Band of the Hawk has come to an end. A life lost by the sword must be gained back by it as well. Griffith grew up in the back alley of some town, looking up at that grand thing, a castle, something that he decided he must have for himself. An absurd goal to say the least, especially considering that despite his noble appearance, Griffith is common born. But I think you'll come to find that if anyone could achieve such an absurd goal, it would be Griffith. One day, Griffith purchased an odd charm from a fortune teller in the market, a crimson behelit, the egg of the king. She told him that he who possesses it shall receive the world in exchange for their own flesh and blood. For someone with dreams as grand as Griffith's, it was a must-have. He would begin to see it as more of a good luck charm, and good luck would be understating it. Griffith began forming an army through his charisma and through his strength, teaching the weak how to fight for themselves and instilling in his followers the sense that they could fight for what they desire. Those that fought for him believed that Griffith was capable of anything, and they weren't wrong in thinking that. It would be no stretch to say that nothing Griffith could desire was ever too far out of his reach. Griffith had an answer for every problem. He saw through every person. Nothing ever got past him, and he always got what he wanted. The Band of the Hawk themselves are undefeated in combat, and this is largely due to Griffith's brilliant cunning and strategy. Even when his I forgot to take this book out of my I don't like Hitler. This is a book against Hitler. Even when his 5,000-man army was tasked with taking an impregnable fortress from an army 6 times the size of his own, Griffith would still overcome with minimal casualties. It was on this rise to power that Griffith would come in contact with a certain mercenary on a certain battlefield, a man by the name of Guts. Guts is everything that Griffith is not. Where Griffith relies on the strength of many to exact his goals, Guts relies only on himself and on his own strength. Griffith has to appeal to those around him and those that follow him in order to gain their loyalty so that they'll fight for him. Guts, on the other hand, cares very little what other people think of him. Perhaps the greatest difference between them is that Griffith finds his motivation in his dream. He picks up a sword for the sake of pursuing that grand goal. Whereas Guts fights simply to survive to the next day. He throws himself into more difficult situations simply to see if he can make it to the next day. And this is ultimately what makes Guts so attractive to Griffith. He decides that he has to have Guts as part of his army, and so invites him to join the Hawks on the condition that Griffith defeats him in combat, which he does manage to do. Griffith appoints Guts his Raiders captain, a kind of loose appointment. It seems to basically be the front lines. They're always at the front of combat, and they always seem to be doing the most important tasks. So Guts has an important role to fulfill within Griffith's dream. Griffith then continues on his journey, eventually allowing his Band of the Hawk to join the kingdom's army proper, no longer mercenaries, and an important step in his grand dream. Griffith is somebody who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. Not only does he have his own absurd dream weighing him down, whether he likes it or not, he also carries the dreams of everybody who decides to fight for him. Every single one of them fights and dies for his dream under the belief that their dreams will come true. And so to those people, he can never show weakness. He can never show doubt. He can never show that even for a second, he thought it impossible to achieve his goals. Because that would instill in those people whether or not they chose to follow the right man. And as a result, Griffith must have found his relationship with Guts to be rather relaxing. Guts is the only person who didn't join the Hawks with any ambition in mind. Guts has no grand dream that he's chasing. Whether Griffith succeeds or fails changes nothing for Guts. Guts harbors no expectations for Griffith. So Griffith finds in Guts somebody that he can let his guard down around. Someone that he can show his weakness to. Someone that he can show his doubt to. Griffith finds in Guts the one person that he can rely on when he can trust in nobody else, because he cannot allow anybody else to see any other image of him than exactly the one that he has curated. I would like to discuss the idea of ideal self versus actual self. All of us in life have an ideal self that differs in some way from our actual self, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in major ways. That ideal self perhaps lacks the weaknesses we deem as weighing us down, while bolstering the strengths that we perceive ourselves as having. That ideal self is who we aspire to be, even if that person is not who we yet are. That ideal self is who you show to people, especially people that you might not know that well. It's not to say that all humans are inherently two-faced or ingenuous. It's more like always putting your best foot forward, always showing people the side of yourself that you are most proud of, or the side of yourself that you aspire to be, even if you aren't quite there. And only when we become close to somebody can we show them that actual self, even if that person is perhaps not the most beautiful version of ourselves. Griffith is not immune to this concept, and we get a pretty good idea of who his ideal self is in his conversation with Charlotte, Princess of the Kingdom, someone for whom he's taken a special interest in, as marrying into the royal family would be a pretty big step in his plans. He explains to Charlotte that a man should have a dream to fight for, something that they would never allow anyone else to trample over, and that they would fight for their body and soul to protect, even if the threat were Griffith himself. And that to him, someone who is his friend and equal is someone who harbors a dream as powerful as his own, someone who would never rely on someone like Griffith to achieve their own goals. And again, Griffith isn't lying here. This is what he truly believes. These are his actual ideals, but is it true? Has Griffith ever had somebody like that in his life? Has there ever been someone in Griffith's life that would stand against him like that holds such powerful dreams that they would trounce his own, or stand toe-to-toe with his own? How would he know that that person would be his true friend and equal if he's never had somebody like that? Instead, consider that the one person that he can let his guard down around does not meet any of those qualifications. Doesn't the one person that he can show his weakness and doubt to have no dream of his own to fight for? Would the one person that he can entrust with all the tasks that he can entrust to no other ever stand against him? Griffith may not realize it himself, but Guts is his one true equal, his one true friend, specifically because he lacks all of those qualifications. And so it's even more ironic that that same ideal self is exactly what would push a wedge between them. This scene is brilliant because despite everything that Griffith has been capable of accomplishing, we never really understand where it comes from. We're along with the rest of the Band of the Hawk, never really knowing what's going on in Griffith's head, just knowing that whatever he says, it will work out because it's Griffith and it always works out. But in this fight, perhaps the most important fight of his life, we will hear Griffith's inner thoughts. His speed and power are nothing like they used to be. I'm not sure I can parry his attack anymore. If I can, my sword still won't last 2 or 3 strikes, and all this snow might hinder my movements. Victory must come in the first strike. The instant his blade falls, I'll deflect it and slice into the top of his shoulder. My speed and timing can't be off even slightly. It's a strike I won't be able to constrain. There's no other technique I can use to beat him now. If successful, even Guts wouldn't escape unharmed. Somewhere along the way, Guts' determination had outstripped Griffith's. Guts himself is unaware of the impact that he's had on Griffith. After all, he himself has been subject to that same ideal self, even if he's seen more of his actual self than anybody else. He can't imagine that someone as small as him would ever have an impact on Griffith, that someone Griffith doesn't even view as an equal could ever stop Griffith on his path. But Guts is wrong. Guts has become so much more than he or Griffith could have ever imagined. He's become so important in Griffith's mind that he's second perhaps only to Griffith's dream. So it only makes sense that following his greatest defeat, Griffith would make his gravest mistake. Following their fight, Griffith would appear in Princess Charlotte's bedroom window and they play Twister. I'm sorry, you two, please, no! Griffith knows how stupid this is. He knows the potential consequences if he gets caught. Ordinarily, he would never do something so risky. But at this point, Griffith is trying to regain some form of control, trying to show himself that he's still capable of taking whatever he desires with his own hands, trying to show himself that he's still Griffith, while he tries to wrap his head around why the loss of a single soldier hurts so bad. But it's exactly as stupid as it appears. Griffith gets caught, and the king doesn't take too kindly to it because he was saving his own daughter for himself. God damn it. Berserk is so fucked. Griffith is imprisoned and tortured, losing his crimson behelit in the process. After all, what good is the luck of the devil in hell itself? The Band of the Hawk are attacked and driven out of the capital without any explanation as to why. One full year passes. The Band of the Hawk is in a state of disarray, to say the least. After spending the last full year running around getting attacked left and right as fugitives of the crown, they're on their last legs, and at that moment they're attacked. And just as it all seems lost, as it seems like this is truly where it ends, that all their fighting has been for nothing, Guts reappears even stronger than before. Guts has spent the last year up in a mountain living with a blacksmith, continuing to train to try to understand why he swings his sword. As a result, he never heard about what happened to Griffith and the Band of the Hawk, and he rushed to their side as soon as he found out. But the damage is already done. While many are happy to see him back, others are unwilling to accept him. After all, he wasn't there when they needed him most. Why should he get to be there when they rescue Griffith and everything goes back to normal? Berserk deals very heavily with a common theme: the idea of keeping what you have versus pursuing what you want. Every major character in this story will be faced with that decision at some point, and Guts himself has to make it multiple times. However, in this situation, he made that decision without even realizing it. By leaving the Hawks, Guts got what he wanted. He found a purpose. Guts realizes that he wants to be stronger. He wants to hone his skills, fighting stronger and stronger enemies, and swinging his sword for no other's sake. Swinging his sword simply so that he can overcome. It's a simple goal, but it's his, and ultimately one that he would end up achieving, though perhaps not in the way that he had wished. But by finding that purpose, he lost his place within the Hawks. Even if he wanted to rejoin them, it would never be the same as it was. But those thoughts are set aside for now. Guts reappeared at the perfect time. The Hawks are ready to infiltrate the capital and rescue Griffith, and Guts is the exact boosted firepower they need to do that. They do manage to reach Griffith, but it's too little too late. After a full year of non-stop torture, Griffith is a broken man. He can no longer speak. He can no longer walk. He can no longer hold a sword. Seeing the state that he is in, Guts flies into a blind rage, destroying any enemy in his path and giving Griffith an excellent opportunity to see how strong Guts has become while Griffith has withered away. They manage to escape the capital with Griffith in tow, not entirely without incident, and the new question becomes, what happens next? The entire past year, the Band of the Hawk has been fighting and surviving under the belief that by getting Griffith back, they could continue on their journey and continue aspiring to their own dreams. But with Griffith in the state that he's in, that becomes an impossibility. Guts' own plans are thrown into question here as well. He was ready to move ahead on his own journey. He wasn't going to rejoin the Hawks, he was going to forge ahead, creating his own path. But can he still do that with Griffith in the state that he's in? Can he just leave behind what he has left in order to pursue his own goals? Guts left the Hawks because he couldn't stand to be looked down upon by Griffith. How do you think Griffith feels then, being pitied by Guts? Struggling to face his new reality, Griffith tries to escape it. He doesn't make it far, and when he's at his lowest point, ready to give it all up, that thing reappears, that crimson behelit, the egg of the king. He who possesses it shall receive the world in exchange for their own flesh and blood. At that moment when he's at his weakest, a solar eclipse occurs, and they're summoned the God Hand. And they offer Griffith a choice. Give up everything that he has in exchange for everything he could ever want. The only thing standing between Griffith and everything he's ever desired is his own attachment to Guts and the rest of the Hawks, but they're less important. Should anyone trample that dream, he would oppose him, body and soul, even if the threat were me, myself. Griffith offers the lives of every member of the Band of the Hawk, including Guts himself, as sacrifice, as demons descend upon them, killing them and consuming them. Guts himself is fine, obviously. He has plot armor, but nobody else is. Worth noting here, the demon that kills his friend Corcus is the same demon Guts killed in the first chapter. The demon that kills his friend Pippin is the Count that Guts fought at the end of the Black Swordsman arc. I don't know if he sought out these demons in particular, I just think it's a really nifty detail. There is one other person who survives the initial onslaught, and that is Casca. I haven't talked much about Casca, but Casca is ridiculously important. Guts and Casca did not initially get along, but she began to see him for who he was when he protected her from falling off a cliff and fought 100 men so that she could escape when she was weakened from her period. Guts became someone who supported Casca in her desire to be Griffith's sword, and Casca became someone that Guts could let his guard down around and show his weakness to. Casca is to Guts what Guts is to Griffith, and Griffith is not unaware of that fact. The other thing I haven't mentioned, because again this is the censored version of the story, is that women do not exactly have it easy in the world of Berserk. And that's all I'm going to say on the matter. You can just assume from here, but the thing you need to remember right now is that Casca is not killed by the demons. Seeing the danger that Casca's in, Guts rushes to her side but gets his arm caught in the mouth of a demon in the process. And at that moment, he awakens. The fifth angel, the king of longing, the God Hand, Femto, and he descends upon Guts. As if to show Guts how little he matters to Griffith anymore, Griffith takes Casca for himself, sending Guts into a blind rage, seeing the man he trusted most hurting the person that he loves most. Guts severs his own arm to free himself from the demon's grasp, but it's to no avail. Another demon crushes his head into the ground, smashing his right eye with its claw in the process, and searing that horrifying image into it, an image that would torture him following this event. As a side note here, the images of pure raw rage depicted in this scene are absurdly well realized within the manga. The animes do a great job in their own right, but you really can't top that incredible depiction within the pages of the manga. At that moment when everything seems lost, when it seems like there's no way to escape this horrifying scene and everything is going to end here, my man appears. Yeah, my man, the Skull Knight! Fuck yeah! I haven't really talked about him much, because he's not super important to the purpose of this video, but the Skull Knight's fucking awesome. This guy shows up every now and then, does some cool shit, and then just pieces out again. He's a total badass. Anyway, he rescues Guts and Casca, and all's well that ends well, except for the people that died. Waking up, Guts finds himself in a world that is no longer his own, in both a metaphorical and physical sense. Guts has been betrayed by the person he trusted most, and everything has been taken from him. The only person to survive that event was Casca, and her sanity has been taken from her. She no longer has any memories, nor any comprehensive skills. She can't even speak or recognize speech. She's a shell of who she once was. Physically, Guts and Casca are now branded as sacrifices, which means they now exist between two worlds. There's the worlds of the physical and the living, known as the ethereal world, and there's the world of the spiritual and of the dead, called the astral world. Beings like elves and trolls and elementals exist within the astral world. The ethereal world and the astral world exist in the same place and at the same time, but are largely separate. The space that they overlap is called the interstice, and this is the space that Guts and Casca now walk because they are branded as sacrifices. Functionally, this means that Guts and Casca are more aware of the astral world. They're more capable of perceiving and interacting with it, but most importantly, it means that under cover of darkness, the dead are drawn from the astral world into the ethereal world to attack and try to possess them. Facing this new reality, Guts dons a suit of all black armor, a form of camouflage since he's going to be fighting mostly in the dark. A prosthetic arm, crafted by the blacksmith he lived with during his year of training. And the Dragon Slayer. A weapon deemed to be useless because of its ridiculous size, but for Guts, it's perfect, especially considering it's the only weapon thick enough to take hits from demons without snapping. Can we get the Dragon Slayer and Monster Hunter, please? Come on, it would be perfect. Guts fights monsters with it, and he literally uses it the same way a Greatsword Hunter would. Fucking Capcom, figure that shit out. I want the Dragon Slayer in Monster Hunter. Guts leaves on a journey of revenge, hell-bent on destroying any demon that he can come across in the hopes that he will at some point face Griffith once again. And we then skip ahead 2 years to the Guts following the Black Swordsman arc. Now then, let's consider everything that I just said. For the last 2 years, Guts has spent all night, every night, fighting the dead. Dark forests, dimly lit interiors, nighttime. Anywhere the dark resides, the dead will come to attack Guts. Then he spends his days traveling, probably fighting some more, and occasionally tries to catch little Z's. But all it takes is a little shadow to come across him for him to get attacked once again. The motherfucker hasn't gotten a good night's sleep in 2 years. No wonder he's gone a little crazy. In fact, while we're at it, let's revisit some of those events from the Black Swordsman arc and reconsider them with our new context. Consider again how Guts told Teresia to kill herself if it was too hard to go on. An absurd suggestion to say the least, but Guts was never talking to Teresia. He's talking to himself. This was the first time Guts has seen Griffith since the events of the Eclipse, when everything was taken from him. And the results of that encounter could not have gone how Guts wanted. Guts can never forgive Griffith, he can never give up on his revenge, but he's still so far from achieving it. He's still so small compared to Griffith. He still has so much further to go. Maybe it would be easier to just give up. To kill himself. It's a dark thought, but he can't just live with this. It has festered for too long. That fire of hatred has burned within him for too long for him to just live and let live. This was Guts challenging himself to keep moving forward. And consider again Guts mocking the old man and his daughter, blaming their deaths on their weakness. Again, not talking to them. No matter where Guts goes, he will always be attacked like this. He can never be weak again. Because for him, to be weak is to die. This is him reminding himself that if he ever shows weakness, he will end up just like them. Does it excuse the cruelty of these actions? No, I wouldn't say so, but it does make them more understandable. At this point in the story, there are two different versions of Guts. There is a protective Guts, wanting to keep what little he has left and willing to sacrifice himself to achieve that end. And a Guts wanting for revenge, so burned by his hatred and fueled only by rage. These two sides are not mutually exclusive. It's a delicate tug of war where one side usually has more control than the other. But when the goals of both sides meet, that is when Guts' true strength can be drawn out. So the question that we're left with at the end of all of this, and the question that I endeavor to answer with this video, is why does the Black Swordsman arc exist? Because despite my referring to it as a backstory at the beginning of this video, the Golden Age arc is where the story was always meant to start. It is the beginning. So why do we go into it with so much spoiled for us already? Going into the Golden Age arc, we know that Guts will lose an arm and an eye. We know that the Band of the Hawk is either no longer around or Guts is no longer a part of it. We know that Griffith betrays Guts. Why do we spend the first 3 volumes spoiling ourselves on what is the first quarter of this story so far? Well, the answer to that is actually somewhat simple. Audiences are inherently alienated by change. It makes sense. You fall in love with a certain aspect or part of a story, and when that part is changed or ripped away entirely, it can be difficult to accept. I can tell you from my experience, I stopped watching Fairy Tail after they had their time skip. Too much of what I liked about it had been taken away, and I wasn't a huge fan of what was left, so it couldn't keep my interest. And I can tell you that if in the middle of One Piece, Luffy went through some traumatic event where he became some cold-hearted monster who attacked and robbed innocent civilians like a proper pirate should, that'd be difficult to accept. In that sense, the Black Swordsman arc is indispensable in making us open and accepting of change. Going into the Golden Age arc, we expect that nothing can stay the way that it is. We know that no matter how much change Guts goes through, he'll always return to this cold-hearted monster. We know that the Band of the Hawk can't stay around forever. Even the basic premise of men waging war against men being turned into a single man waging war against monsters would be very difficult to accept were it not for the fact that we always know this is where it was supposed to end up. This is where it was always going. And conversely, just as it makes us accepting of the character that Guts is at the end of the Golden Age arc, it makes us accepting of the character that he can become following those events. After this point, Guts is a character that is constantly in flux, constantly fighting between those two sides of himself. After being forced to return to Casca's side, Guts has to choose between protecting her or pursuing his desire for revenge, and being forced to face the reality that he simply cannot do both. There isn't enough Guts to go around. And as a result, Guts is forced to change, forced to become more compassionate once again, forced to become less selfish in order to protect what he has left. Guts goes through so much growth and change as he tries to find a balance between those two sides of himself, to the point that the decisions that Guts makes in one point of the story are not the decisions that he would make in a different point in the story, because those two Guts are basically different characters entirely. And we are able to accept that change, because the Black Swordsman arc taught us to expect change, that nothing will stay the way that it is. The Black Swordsman arc allows us to accept what is ultimately one of the most dynamically written characters in all of manga history. Did you actually watch this whole video? What the fuck is wrong with you? Get a hobby, dork. Seriously, thank you for watching. I am very passionate about this subject, if you cannot tell. If you have read Berserk yourself, you might have thought that I spent a little too long going over the events within Berserk, and you're not entirely wrong, but when I decided to make this video, I had 2 goals in mind. The first being I wanted to share my own interpretation of Berserk, and the second being I wanted to share Berserk itself with people who are perhaps less willing to subject themselves to the vile shit that is within its pages. So as a result, I had to spend a lot of time going over events, and I hope I was able to achieve that goal. We'll see. Berserk has quickly cemented itself as one of the best manga I've ever read, and I really, really, really wanted to share that love with the world. If through this video I managed to pique your interest in Berserk, and you're worried that you're too spoiled to enjoy it, worry not. You should jump into Berserk if you're willing to subject yourself to some really dark shit. I read through the first 22 volumes of Berserk twice for the sake of this video, and both times I was so gripped by it that I just simply couldn't put it down. So even knowing what happens, it's an incredible read, and there's a lot that I still could not cover in this video. I couldn't give Casca and Guts' relationship the true time that it deserves. I couldn't even cover the other members of the Hawks. Judo, Pippin, Rickert, Corcus. No one likes him. And I really do recommend the manga over animated versions. The 1997 version is fine, but the trilogy only covers the Golden Age arc. It doesn't cover the Black Swordsman arc or anything afterwards. And Berserk 2016 and 17, it's rough. I know I'm beating a dead horse by saying that, but Berserk has some of the best art I have ever fucking seen. So it's really a disgrace to see it just butchered in that way. So I really recommend that manga, but the trilogy of movies is also a fantastic way to experience the Golden Age arc. Even if they left out some things that I thought were really important, it's a really good way to experience it. I wrote this video around the time that I finished my read through of the first 22 volumes a second time, and since then I have caught up to Berserk, and having to face the reality that I now have to wait for new chapters to come out, I haven't felt this pained since I caught up with One Piece.
This seems like a good time to interject. Hi everybody, this is Mack from about 3 weeks in the future of when I recorded this video. And as many of you will already know, while I was in the middle of working on this video, it was announced that Kentaro Miura, the author of Berserk, has passed away. I haven't been reading Berserk as long as many others. I only started reading Berserk earlier this year, but I think this video, if you've actually made it all the way to this point, should show that it's had a pretty big impact on me. I have fallen so much in love with it. I've thought about it constantly, especially while working on this video. I'm a very obsessive person when it comes to writing my videos. When I write my script, I run through it over and over and over in my head. When I edit it, I will edit it for 10 hours straight, and then I will dream about it during the night, and then when I'm at work the next day, I'll think about different ways I can edit different parts. I think about the subjects of my videos non-stop while I'm working on them, and that means I've thought about Berserk non-stop for the past almost a month. And ever since hearing that Kentaro Miura had passed away, it's been difficult, to say the least. But speaking as a creative person, as someone who creates things and is very passionate about that, I feel like I can say that Kentaro Miura led the best life that someone could possibly lead. He was born in 1966, and Berserk started coming out in 1989. There was a prototype of Berserk that came out in 1988, so you can assume that he's been working on it even longer than that. But that's like half of, maybe more than half of, I haven't done that math myself, of his life spent only working on Berserk. And to be able to put your entire being, your entire soul into something like that, something that is so genre-defining and so life-changing for so many people, that's the dream. Both Monster Hunter and Dark Souls, my two favorite game series, were inspired by Berserk, and tons and tons of manga artists and artists in general have been inspired by his work. And to be able to have an impact like that on the world with something that you've been passionate about, well, there's no better way to live. Even though he's no longer with us, the thing that he left us, Berserk, will live on forever, and I thank him for that. I thank him for giving with his life something that I will cherish forever, and that many others will as well. And I just had to add that at the end, because it's been a very emotional week for me since finding out about his passing. But even though I will never get more Berserk in its current state. It would be greedy of me to ask more from him.
This is an elongated outro just because I had a lot to say and I said all of it and I wanted to cap it off with my thoughts. Check out my Twitch if you like video games. I'm currently playing through the Dark Souls series, which are heavily inspired by Berserk. So if you're into Berserk, maybe you enjoy seeing me fail at being good at that. Check out my podcast. I do a lot of talking on there. So if you like this video, then I do the whole fuck lot of talking. So go listen to the podcast and you have a good old day. And remember, fuck Corcus. No one likes Corcus.